Thank you for joining us today. My name is Marcy Mistrat, and I am the Executive Director at the Campaign for Youth Justice. We know that many of you have covered stories on children in the adult criminal justice system and know that the adult criminal justice system is no place for a child. The Campaign for Youth Justice is a national campaign to end the prosecution, sentencing, and incarceration of youth in the adult criminal justice system. Every year, nearly 100,000 U.S. children are charged as adults and face adult consequences for their misbehavior. Prosecuting youth as adults falls heavily on children of color who are sentenced as adults at nearly 9 times their white peers for the same crimes. The Campaign for Youth Justice supports state and national campaigns that address these negative outcomes and give young people the services and supports they need to become healthy, participating adults. Jeree Thomas, our Policy Director, will share some highlights from this year's legislative session.
Thank you, Marcy. So in October 2017, the Campaign for Youth Justice released our Raising the Bar State Trends Report, which highlights trends in removing youth under 18 out of the adult criminal justice system. This year, we saw a continuation of many of those positive trends. And so in 2018, 8 states passed 11 laws that rolled back the treatment of youth as adults in the criminal justice system. Specifically, Arizona, Delaware, Indiana, Missouri, Tennessee, Virginia, Vermont, and Washington State. So today, I will focus on the trends related to transfer of youth to the adult system by judges, prosecutors, or legislators, and my colleagues will focus on other related areas. So in Washington State, Vermont, and Tennessee, the legislature limited the types of offenses that can result in youth being transferred to adult court. In Arizona and Washington State, the legislature also expanded residual juvenile court jurisdiction so that instead of judges or prosecutors feeling the need to transfer 16 or 17-year-olds because they won't have enough time to be rehabilitated in the juvenile justice system, they now can be served in the juvenile justice system beyond age 18. So to give you an example, for Washington State, youth, once the laws fully implemented, youth will be able to be served in the juvenile justice system up to age 25. In Delaware, the legislature passed a bill to raise the age at which youth is automatically transferred to adult court for a firearm offense from 15 to 16. They also created opportunities for youth with firearm offenses to be waived back to juvenile court. This is significant because firearm offenses are generally the types of offenses that youth are automatically treated as adults for, but we see here that Delaware is trying to offer more opportunities for an individual review of a young person's case before doing that. Finally, in Indiana, the legislature passed a data bill that requires public reporting on transfer by factors like race, gender, county of transfer, and sentence. So this bill will really help advocates understand who is getting transferred to adult court, where the youth are coming from who are being transferred, and the racial disparities in the process, which is really important to understand in order to help reduce those disparities. So now I'll turn it over to Brian Evans, our State Campaigns Director, to share more good news.
Yeah, thank you, Jeree, and thank you all for being here. I'm going to talk first about raise the age laws, which, as you probably know, are laws that raise the age of juvenile court jurisdiction. Missouri this past year became the 10th state in the past decade to raise the age of criminal responsibility to 18. That law will go into effect on January 1st, 2021. Now, in terms of number of children affected, the raise the age laws are the most significant reform. They affect the most numbers of children. And now there are only 4 states that still set the age of majority at 17 in their laws. This is the fewest number since the inception of the juvenile court. One of those 4 states is Michigan. Michigan has raise the age legislation currently pending in its House. And recent polling that you see in the bar graphs there from the Marketing Resource Group, which is a big Michigan state polling firm, shows that this legislation has strong support across all partisan and demographic groups, which is, as you all know, unusual in our current political climate. So this bodes well that maybe after the August primaries in Michigan, they will get back to work in the legislature and move this bill, or this package of bills forward that includes raising the age in Michigan. The other three states that still need to raise the age from 17 to 18 are Georgia, Texas, and Wisconsin. Another interesting development that's not on here, it happened quite recently, is that Vermont passed a law that the governor signed on May 30th that raises the age of juvenile jurisdiction to 18 and 19 in the year 2020 and the year 2022, respectively. So by the year 2022, all teenagers, all children under the age of 20 will be under juvenile jurisdiction, with the exception of serious violent felonies. And if you're interested, the bill number there is S-234, signed on May 30th by the governor of Vermont. Also this year, we saw states that passed raise the age laws in the past couple of years begin the process of implementation, which is a very difficult, challenging process involving budgets and convincing everybody that we still need to do it. Louisiana, however, is the only state that has delayed its implementation date, and that by only a few months. Louisiana's change is now set to be implemented in March of 2019 instead of later this year for 17-year-olds charged with nonviolent offenses, and then the next year for violent offenses. The other thing to look for this year is that New York's raise the age law for 16-year-olds goes into effect October 1st of this year, and there's a lot of preparations underway at the state and county and in New York City to prepare for that. I think they will be ready, but it's an important story to watch. It's a very big state, and there's a lot of changes to be made. So on the next slide, I will talk just a bit about jail removal. This is another issue that more states are taking up, getting young people out of adult jails and prisons where they're at high risk of assault and suicide, and there's just no place for a child in adult facilities. States are moving away from this. We know that since the year 2000, the number of youth and adult jails has dropped by more than half. In 2000, it was around 6,126, as you see, and now it's down to about 3,000 per day. 3,000 per day is way too many children to be housed with adults, and every one of those children is at high risk, and we need to get that number down to 0. 3 states this year made it easier to house youth charged as adults in youth facilities. This is while they're awaiting pre-trial. Tennessee, Virginia, and Delaware. Jail removal was also part of New York's raise the age law, and also coming October 1st, 2018, is the deadline for New York City to remove all children under 17 out of Rikers. And that is running into some challenges regarding staffing and where they're going to be housed. And there's a lot of work on that right now in the courts and in the media and behind the scenes. Also, I think a very interesting and very important story that's going to affect how raise the age works for 17-year-olds in New York and how it works in other states that are trying to do it. So after, I will turn it back over to Jeree to talk about the particular case in Tennessee that I know she worked closely with.
Yes, so in Tennessee, there was a situation where we had young girls who were being transferred to adult court and being put in the custody of the sheriff in Shelby County. And the sheriff determined that he did not have a safe place for girls to be held in adult jail. And so instead, he asked for them to be placed in adult prison. And so you had young girls being placed in an adult prison, generally held in solitary confinement, hundreds of miles away from their home. And so as a result of these cases in particular, there was both a local push and a statewide push to really impact these practices. And so in Tennessee, there was a law that passed amending the safekeeping law there. So now sheriffs do have the ability to place youth who are tried as adults in juvenile facilities when there is not a safe place for them to be held in an adult jail. And what's key here is that what the Shelby County official said was basically there's no jail in the state that really has a safe place for girls in particular who have been tried as adults to be held in jails. And so that was some of the outcome of that particular case, was this change in the law.
I'd like to now welcome Rachel Marshall to talk about the work at the federal level and how that is impacting young people.
Thanks, Marcy. So the primary piece of federal legislation that protects children in custody, the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act, or the JJDPA, has gone unauthorized since 2007. Last summer, both chambers passed bipartisan bills that are strongly aligned, and both call for the removal of youth under the age of 18 from adult jails pre-trial. Other improvements in the bill include the strengthening of the deinstitutionalization of status offenders' core protection, comprehensive services and support for youth, such as the promotion of community-based alternatives to detention and the encouragement of family engagement in the design and delivery of treatment services, and the strengthening of incentives to invest in evidence-based practices, to name just a few. As I'm sure a lot of you probably know, this administration has come out hard with a narrative of unaccompanied minor children belonging to the MS-13 gang, alarmingly reminiscent of the super predator framing used back in the 1990s. Despite plentiful data and stories that show the vast majority of unaccompanied children are not gang members nor criminals, the administration continues to pursue executive orders and enforcement strategies that target these children, most of whom are fleeing violence and unsafety in their country of origin. Congress is jumping on board and recently had a hearing on the topic in the Senate, and the House has already passed a bill that creates a sweeping definition of the term criminal gang and promotes widespread racial profiling. Finally, we've also seen concerning proposals arise amidst the increase of incidents of school violence. In response to violent tragedies in our schools, Congress and the administration have suggested measures that would beef up surveillance, increase law enforcement presence in schools, and urge the institution of zero-tolerance policies. Yet we know that these actions cause more harm than good, particularly for youth of color and youth with disabilities. The increase for support of law enforcement in schools is particularly concerning because it helps to fuel the school-to-prison pipeline. This is particularly true in states that have not raised the age of criminal responsibility. In those states, if a 16 or 17-year-old gets into a fight in school or on the school bus, they will automatically be charged as adults. The presence of law enforcement will also increase the chance of referrals for low-level, typical adolescent behavior. Students need positive behavioral interventions and support, which studies have shown actually improve safety at school. Instead of funneling youth into the justice system, we have been encouraging Congress to support funding for these types of supports and services. And now I'll turn it back over to Marcy.
Thanks, Rachel. So as we move forward, as we move to looking to what is next, we want to focus your attention on a few things. First is the fact that there has been some backlash and some bad legislation that has been introduced this session. The national narrative that returns us to the era of get tough on crime that targets gangs and children is certainly trickling down to states. This national narrative is hurting children. While advocates beat back several of the worst laws, 3 states did pass legislation that will impact children charged as adults. Maryland and Kentucky both increased sanctions for gang-related crimes and mandatory minimums, and in West Virginia, there was a law passed that moves children certified as adults to the Department of Corrections on their 18th birthday. Previously, they had been able to stay longer in the youth facility if it was appropriate. Second, despite those challenges, there are still real great opportunities to monitor that will be doing some really great things for children. California still has pending legislation that would eliminate all transfer for youth under the age of 16. That would make California with the most progressive laws and follows many other steps that they've taken over the past 5 to 10 years to ensure that California is treating children like children. As Brian mentioned earlier, Michigan still has a pending package of legislation that raises the age of criminal responsibility, but also deals with automatic transfer and children in adult jails. Finally, in New Jersey, SB 314 would limit solitary confinement for youth under age 21. They just released a report, and we have information of that on our social media page, which I will give you in a minute. Finally, if you are looking for things that need to be covered in the next few months, I wanted to point out that later this month, we'll be releasing a report on the historical context of current transfer laws on Black youth in America in partnership with the National Association of Social Workers. There will also be a jail report released at the end of the summer focusing on ways that the remaining states can remove youth from their adult jails. In September, we plan to release a brief around the 15th anniversary of the Prison Rape Elimination Act, specifically how states are complying with the Youthful Inmate Standard. And finally, in October, we will be celebrating the 10th anniversary of YJAM, or Youth Justice Action Month, and promoting our theme of Vote Youth Justice. We will be highlighting mothers of the youth justice movement, and we'll be partnering with the Performing Statistics Project of Art 180 in Richmond, Virginia, and youth who are currently incarcerated locally on developing materials for this month. We now welcome you to ask any questions you might have. For the benefit of those of you listening, please just introduce yourself and share your affiliation. Thank you.
If on our guest on the line, your lines are unmuted if you have any questions. Let's see, we do have one online question, and the question was, where can I find some more of the data that was gone over in your presentation? More of the research.
That's great. On the campaign's website, www.cfyj.org, we have posted all current reports by state in our state resource section, and then in the national resource section, there is connections to new research, new reports, and new data that is out. A lot of our information comes from BJS or OJJDP, two federal resources that collect data broadly.
And just a reminder for our attendees, your phone lines are open and anyone is able to ask a question. We did have...
Hey, this is Rebecca from the AP. Hey, I was curious with regard to the, can you hear me?
Yes, you can, Rebecca.
Okay. I was curious with regard to the schools security type measures, or have specific laws. I mean, this is sort of in response to the shooting in Marjorie Stoneman in Florida. Have you actually seen laws that were passed, or is it mostly things that have been proposed to beef up school security that make you nervous?
So on the federal level, there was a piece of legislation called the Stop School Violence Act. It passed as a standalone measure in the House and then was added to the fiscal year 2018 omnibus bill on the Senate side and was ultimately signed into law. This piece of legislation provides grant funding to schools to do things like implement school threat assessment systems, anonymous reporting systems, and also beefing up school security so you can use it for things like metal detectors and surveillance cameras, things of that nature. We're very concerned about this legislation and the impact that it might have on minority youth, LGBT youth, and youth with disabilities. There are no due process protections in place, so there is no way to find out, for example, with the anonymous reporting system, If a report is made against you and that's a false report, there's no kind of repercussions. There's no data collection measures in place, so we're not going to be able to see once schools start receiving these grants and implementing these programs, whether these programs are having a disparate impact on minority youth, which we're very concerned about. And there have been numerous other pieces of legislation introduced thus far that haven't really received any movement, but that we're keeping an eye on. And I know that there have been multiple proposals in the states as well. So I'm not sure whether those have received a lot of traction.
And sorry, what was the name of the federal grant program that you had mentioned?
It's called the Stop School Violence Act.
Okay.
And one thing you should take note of is that the funding for that is through the U.S. Department of Justice. It is not through the Department of Education, and it is not through SAMHSA. So it is going through the law enforcement function of our federal government, and the grant solicitation went out last week. So they will be administering $75 million this year for that program.
Did we have any more questions? We did have one more question that was sent in, and just a question about what are some of the key issues or good stories that I could cover going on across the country.
So,
Sheree, do you want to go ahead?
yes, so there are a couple of key issues popping up. So as Marcy mentioned, in New Jersey, there was recently a report on the mental health needs of youth who are held in solitary confinement in adult prisons. And this was a report put out by the New Jersey Parents Caucus. They are actually hosting a Facebook event, a Be Live event in partnership with us, with one of their youth members who's going to be sharing his experience of being held in solitary confinement in an adult prison on next Tuesday in honor of the International Day to support victims of torture. And so that will be happening next Tuesday. There's also some work being done in North Carolina. There is a young girl who unfortunately committed suicide while being held in an adult jail, and so there's going to be some work around that as well by the Youth Justice Project, which is a part of the Southern Coalition for Social Justice. There's also some work being done in Nevada, where the ACLU of Nevada recently released a report focused on how to hold youth who are tried as adults in juvenile placements instead of them being held in adult prisons. So the ACLU of Nevada did release a report I believe it was last Tuesday, that was focused on that issue. And there was a legislative hearing in the Nevada legislature. Specifically, I believe it's the Committee for Child Welfare and Juvenile Justice, heard from experts from other states who shared how they are safely holding youth tried as adults in their juvenile facilities. So we're seeing these issues pop up in a couple of places, and we're hearing young people and their families talking directly about those experiences.
And if I just might add one other thing, there's been stories, obviously we have been inundated with messages about young people being separated, forcefully separated from their families, who are coming to the United States requesting asylum. And one thing that I did want to point out is that there are contracts with ORR, with state juvenile prisons, in California, in Virginia, and in West Virginia. There was a news story today that broke about the mistreatment of young people in the Virginia facility in Shenandoah. And there is for us, who's been advocating for children to be treated in community-based alternatives where they get the supports of their family and age-appropriate services, it doesn't come to much surprise, but we should be very clear that a significant number of these young people are going to prison, and youth prisons, and that both in Virginia and California, because of pressure, they are considering cutting their contracts with ORR, so they would no longer accept these children into their custody. And I think we should be pressuring West Virginia, that just recently signed a contract with ORR, to do the same.
I also just wanted to mention, in terms of the federal level, I know that there have been a lot of stories related to criminal justice reform, and I think a lot of times juvenile justice reform gets lost in those conversations. Of course, like I mentioned, we're really close to reauthorizing the JJDPA, and in addition, with the Sentencing Reform and Corrections Act, the Senate bill, there are a couple of good provisions related to juvenile solitary confinement and juvenile life without parole. And again, I think those stories just kind of get lost in the broader national conversation on criminal justice reform. Great. Do we have any more questions?
Hey, just another quick question from Louisiana. Do you all, the delay in implementing the changes on the raise the age in Louisiana, is that, I mean, it seems to be a couple of months. Is it concerning to y'all, or is it seem like it's just a slight blip?
I think what's concerning about it is there's not a good reason for it, right? And we know that last year a young man committed suicide in the New Orleans Parish Prison, who was 17 years old. If that is not a call to action to get this law implemented, I'm not really sure what is.
I would say that the good news is just pushing it till March means it gets implemented before their next legislative session, so they can't put it off again. So yes. I think they have to do it now. So
yeah. So
but now we have to get to the work. Jerry knows more about sort of the nuts and bolts.
Yeah, so I'll actually be in Louisiana next week. They're going to have their next governor's sort of task force on raise the age implementation, and so I think that's another opportunity to hopefully hear about what their plan is to move forward, because of course delays are concerning when you consider the real life implications of young people being held in adult jails and prisons and the impact that it has on them.
Great. I'm just checking to see if we have any more questions.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We will be posting this on our website, so if you need any of the information, the PowerPoint will be available on the Campaign for Youth Justice's website, and I believe you can see the information on how to find us there and our emails still on your screen. Thank you for your questions and for covering this critical subject.
Thank you.